Hazel was waiting. She was sitting at the employment center. They promised to find her something. The woman arrived in this town only yesterday, having paid for the ticket with the last money she had. There was also a necklace and a cross around her neck, but that was for the hungriest day. Rings, earrings, everything had to be left behind, but she did not regret it at all. The important thing was that she was alive, and there was no guarantee that she would stay alive in her town. Hazel gave not her ID card, but her sister's card, which could not be found after her death. But just recently the young woman accidentally found it in the guest room, between the wall and the sofa. They definitely were alike, but now Hazel felt strong jitters. "Come in." She walked into the office. "The only thing I can offer you at the moment is to clean the house, tend the flower beds, and cook for one person." Such a position we have called wife for an hour. Do not be scared. It is not what you might think, just an alternative to husband for an hour. In this case, accommodation is possible. I agree. That is good. Hazel approached the house. It was beautiful, majestic even. Of course, she would have preferred a job where she wouldn't have to face powerful people, but right now she had no choice. The woman pressed the bell button and waited. Henry Burton was a big businessman, a philanthropist, the director of a charitable recording studio for orphans, and a man of many more titles and positions. Now, he was staring at the stove. Sure enough, the coffee has boiled over again, and it wasn't the first time the cheeky drink had done it, so a carpet of burned coffee spots had already formed on the stove. He thought about trying to make a new one, or to drink coffee at work. When the doorbell rang, he opened the door. A young, very interesting woman stood before him. "Can I help you?" The woman was visibly embarrassed, then answered, "I'm from the agency, the wife for an hour." And she finally blushed. Henry sighed. A third woman to come this month. The first two girls decided to jump right into bed with him, and the third one was a total freak. He had gone on a business trip, but his plans changed, and Henry returned home 2 days earlier. And his housekeeper organized such a den here that he didn't even recognize his own house at first. There were a lot of people invited. Half of them were already unconscious. He understood that he could not do without a domestic helper. But to be honest, he was even a little afraid of these women, with pure and innocent eyes, who were sent by the agency. "Can you make a coffee?" Hazel was a little confused, but quickly came to her senses. "Yes." "Then don't just stand there. Make me a quick coffee. The kitchen is that way." He waved somewhere indefinitely and disappeared into the house. The woman followed him. "Well, this is certainly the kitchen." "It's true. You can't see everything because of the dirty dishes. They are restaurant food wrappers." Hazel immediately saw the coffee and the marks that the owner apparently had already tried to make it. She made the drink, poured it into a cup, and wanted to look for the master, but he appeared in the kitchen. "It smells good." She handed him the cup, and finally got a good look at him. He was 40 years old. His look was tired, but very deep. There was something about them that caught her eye. Quite tall, but not skinny. Well, he's not ugly. So why doesn't he have a housekeeper? Maybe he's some kind of a latent psycho? Doesn't look like one either. Then he talked. "My name is Henry Burton. As you can imagine, I can't cope with all this. Not because I don't like cleanliness, but simply because I don't always have time for basic sleep. I really hope to fill the vacancy with you, and my house will finally be clean. I hope you can find everything you need by yourself. There's money for groceries, and houseware in a drawer, and your room is at the end of the hall. Excuse me, I have to go. By the way, the coffee is great." And then he left the house. He closed the door and immediately forgot about the new housekeeper. His company was getting ready to make a pretty big deal. He was going to buy a very large factory in a neighboring town. The field was new to him, but it was worth a try. Henry did not really understand how the owner there would refuse such an advantage. He asked for reports for the last 6 months. The data were impressive. The price was not small at all, but it seems worth it. Hazel looked around, sighed. Then she put the headphones in her ears and began to clean. Before the evening, the kitchen was literally brought back to life. While cleaning, she discovered a lot of useful things. Besides, She cooked dinner. She had no idea whether Henry would be back or not, but it was part of her duties. He arrived just as Hazel was about to go to bed. She quickly came out of the room. "Good evening, Mr. Burton." "Good." He hesitated. "I asked what your name was." She shook her head and almost blurted, "Hazel." But she remembered in time that her sister, whose passport she applied for a job, the name was Lucy. "My name is Lucy. Will you be having dinner?" The man raised his eyebrows. "Do we have a dinner?" "Of course. I didn't have time to go shopping today, but I made something." She went into the kitchen. Burton followed her. He whistled. "Did you wash it all by yourself?" "Of course. In fact, it wasn't as bad as it looked at first glance." Henry ate and tried to remember when he had been able to eat delicious homemade meal when he came home late at night. Probably only when his wife was alive, and she had been gone for 10 years. He thanked Hazel and then said, "Lucy, I'm going to have guests next week. It is very important that they are happy with everything. Do you understand? Snacks, drinks, flowers, or anything else. We're going to close a deal, and we need a conducive atmosphere, you know? Anyway, organize something like a party. There'll be my friends, business partners with their wives, and new people, which is exactly what I need. You'll have to do it all, including the waiters. Just let's agree. If you can't, if you've never done this before, I'll hire someone." Hazel smiled. She loved to give parties. It was her hobby. "No, I can manage everything." "That's fine. I don't like strangers in my house all the time. Here's the card. You can buy whatever you need." For a week, Hazel was getting ready. Sometimes she met Henry in the evenings, brought food, and told him how preparations were going. Henry increasingly liked this young woman with sad eyes. It was a little unclear to him what she was doing in such a profession as wife for an hour. Judging by her speech, her phrasing, her thoughts, the woman had very good education, and once he realized that she knew French very well, that surprised him even more. Moreover, she made no effort to understand foreign speech. Somehow the home phone rang. Lucy picked up the phone, answered something, and then brought it to his office. "Your friend Louis. He was very kind and told me that he wanted to talk to you about fishing together. And I wouldn't think of saying you weren't home." Henry smiled, picked up the phone, and only then remembered that Louis does not know many English words. He usually uses only double whiskey and one more please. He decided that he had to ask Lucy about her past life, where she had studied, and why she had become a housekeeper. He had always been loyal to people, but he didn't like dark horses, although he could delegate it to the security, let them check her out. Everything was ready for the party, only Hazel was not ready. At the last moment, 2 hours before the party, she found out who was the dear guest Henry was waiting for. Everything in her soul was intertwined: fear, hatred, resentment. She simply did not know what to do. She did not want to be recognized, but she also could not let Henry, who had treated her kindly, make this deal. When the tables were set and the waiters were making the final arrangements, Henry brought the nameplates. "Look at this. I know it's not a restaurant, but these are the people I want to see next to me, this in front of me, and the rest as you see them." Hazel looked at the signs. The first name almost knocked her off her feet. Braden J. Fernsby. She was sure that there was no second person with such a combination. It was definitely her husband. So this was how he was solving his problems. The party was in full swing. The guests were a delight with the food, and the appearance of the terrace, the unobtrusive music. Hazel saw Henry and her hubby move to the home office to sign the papers. Hazel tied some kind of a kerchief, pulled it over her eyes, painted her lips with bright red lipstick. She had never used that color in her life. Put on her glasses and moved toward the office. "Master, we should talk," she shouted in such a high-pitched voice that those present there even twitched. Henry looked at her with surprise. To be honest, he didn't even recognize her at first. "Lucy, can't it wait?" "No way, now!" Henry apologized and went out to her. "Mr. Burton, I beg you, don't sign it. I'll explain everything to you later. You can't sign this." He looked at her in surprise. "Lucy, what do you think you're doing?" I don't want you, the housekeeper, the wife for an hour, prying into your master's business. Go to the kitchen." He returned to the office, and Hazel was ready to do anything to stop it. Without thinking long, she grabbed a vase of flowers, threw it on the papers in the office, and rushed off. The water ruined all the papers. Some chuckled, some groaned. Mr. Fernsby stood up. "This is ridiculous. I have other offers." He came out and was immediately followed by two of Henry's partners, who openly said that he was always lucky to grab everything first. People were leaving the party with laughter. Of course he would go through the loss of this enterprise, but what the hell? He was about to track down Lucy, and then call the police, but a security guard knocked on the door. "May I? Come in." "About Lucy, you asked to know." "Yes, I'm listening to you." "In fact, your housekeeper's name is not Lucy. Lucy was her sister, who died under unclear circumstances 2 years ago. This is Hazel Fernsby." "Fernsby?" Henry looked at his guard in utter amazement. "That's right. She's the wife of that out-of-town businessman with whom you've been doing some business lately." "So, now I don't understand anything at all." "I'll explain." He turned sharply. Hazel was standing in the doorway. Henry stood up. He let the guard go. "Sit down. To be honest, I'm in a situation where I don't know whether to kill you for making fun of me or go to the police. Or maybe I should thank you. It's up to you." She told how she had married the man for love. No one in their family could have imagined that Braden only wanted their money. He had a very wealthy family, and just 5 years ago he had got a huge inheritance. But when Hazel and Lucy's father died of illness, she finally realized what kind of a man he was. Braden could not keep his joy. He even got drunk. And then he told her that he really needed their money because he had lost his fortune, and the factory without money very quickly goes downhill. Hazel told Lucy everything, and that was her main mistake. Lucy died, and the young woman was sure that her husband was involved. She began to seriously fear for her life, and then found in her husband's desk papers, which said that all of her inheritance she gave to her husband. All that was left was her signature. Besides the fact that there was no money for the factory, Braden had huge areas. I think he's selling you an unprofitable enterprise, or rather I'm sure that everything is not so simple there. They talked all evening, into the night. Then Henry sent Hazel to bed. "You're perfectly safe with me. No one will know you're here. I have business to attend to." Hazel saw only glimpses of Henry for a whole week. She continued to cook and clean, not really knowing what was next. One day he came home early. He sat down in front of her and asked, "Hazel, we can solve everything in one fell swoop. But if you tell me no, I'll understand you." "Go on." "Tomorrow one of my, let's say, colleagues is having a big reception at the best restaurant in town. There will be the deal. You understand what it is? I invite you to accompany me, especially since I have all the documents now that'll help put your husband on trial. You'll be free of him, once and for all. Think about it." "I have nothing to think about. Only..." "What?" Hazel smiled. "I have nothing to wear." Henry looked at her confused, and then they laughed together. "Well, that's certainly not a problem. In the morning, Jason, you saw him, is at your service. Don't spare any money. You have to owe it to shine." When they entered the hall, everyone was silent. Henry had about the same reaction when he saw Hazel ready to go to the reception. She was not just beautiful, she was divine. They walked to the host, who was accompanied by Hazel's husband. He was staring at her and Henry. "If I'm not mistaken, this is your wife for an hour?" "Well, I hope for life, but that's not what I'm after." Hazel looked at Henry in surprise, and suddenly she blushed. Braden glared at her, but she held herself perfectly well. She was no longer afraid of him, because Henry was protecting her. As Henry began to speak, someone said, "Look, he couldn't make it himself, so he decided to stop others from doing it." But then he started to pulling out the papers. "These are the real reports, not the fake ones. Read them in your spare time." Braden turned purple. "Who do you believe? How can you believe the man who came to such a reception was someone else's wife?" The one who was supposed to sign the contract with him asked, "Whose wife is this?" Braden froze. Hazel answered for him. "I'm his wife. That's why I know everything he's done. I'm also sure he's responsible for my sister's death. Hazel watched in horror at what then began to happen. Braden threw himself at her, but Henry came between them. The fight ensued, the police and people screaming. It had been 2 years since that day. She kissed her daughter, who had just fallen asleep, and left the room. Immediately she was embraced by her husband. And have I told you today that you are the most... You have. Henry, let's go to bed. I want to sleep. Hazel laughed and tried to break free. Sure, let's go. That's exactly what I wanted to suggest. He looked at Hazel innocently, and then she realized that she had fallen into her own trap. Henry, I love you so much. He puts his arm around her, but I do more.